Splunk is very customizable and also very extensible. So if I customize or extend my Splunk, the question is, how can I share this with other users? And this is where apps come into play. So an app is nothing more than an add-on extending the functionality of Splunk. So with apps we can teach Splunk new tricks, but also apps can be containers of configurations. So maybe I want to do something like I want to bundle together a default Splunk configuration for Splunk Web I want to make use of on all of my Splunk instances. So for example, I could configure it to be running on port 443, to use a certain certificate, and to use only certain TLS cipher suits. And I could bundle this together in something like a Splunk Web default config app, and this can be used then on all of the different machines, so I can make sure that they all have the same configuration, and it's very nicely packaged together. And examples of apps can be, maybe I want to teach Splunk to parse certain data correctly. So imagine IP tables, firewalls logs. I want Splunk to know where is the source IP, where is the destination IP, where is the source port, where is the destination port, how should these fields be named, and things like that. So it's like teaching Splunk another language. With apps we can teach Splunk how to interact with certain data, how to parse the data. And apps can also contain additional visualizations. So we already have a lot of visualizations in our tool belt when we are installing Splunk out of the box. But if there is some new shiny fancy visualization coming up or we want to use, then we can have a look if this is existing, if we can install it later on. But also we can teach Splunk with apps to integrate, to talk to other services. So imagine I'm running something like a search that is looking for suspicious behavior, and if this suspicious behavior arises, I want to create a ticket in a ticketing system. So this is also doable with apps. Maybe I want to trigger a vulnerability scan, or whatever you can imagine is possible by talking to an API. We can teach Splunk to talk to these services. And apps can also come with ready-to-use dashboards, alerts, and other elements. So if I'm something like a storage vendor and my storage is providing logs and metrics maybe, then I can create a Splunk app for my storage product, and customers who are using Splunk and have my storage can use these dashboards and alerts and other elements right away, and they get something like a head start and have a nice ready-to-go integration of these two products. And if you have a closer look, you will realize that apps are just compressed folders, and these folders contain config files, images, code, and the like. So if you remember when we talked about Splunk configuration files, there are certain file names we have to use so Splunk realizes what we want to achieve, like inputsconf, webconf, and the like. And it is kind of the same with the folders inside of apps. There are certain folder names we have to use so Splunk recognizes the format, Splunk recognizes our app and knows what to do with the files inside the folder. And at the same time, if we download an app, we want to edit something or we want to search for something, we can also be sure that the folder names are what we are expecting from them. And the first folder we're going to have a look at is the bin folder. The bin folder contains code and scripts. So maybe we want to run a script every 5 minutes and it generates or fetches some data and sends it back to our Splunk. And this is possible using the bin folder. So on Linux systems, we typically see something like bash scripts or Python scripts, and on Windows systems, we can use batch files, PowerShell scripts, and something like. And you may remember the default folder. This is where the author of an app is providing the default configuration for it. So if you're not the author of an app, you should never edit something in the default folder, because when you update the app, the changes get overwritten and your customizations may get lost. And this is where the local folder comes into play. If you want to customize something locally, if you want to change something, then this is done using the local folder. If you remember the lesson about config file precedents, then you remember that local folder always trumps the default folder, so it's safe to edit customizations in there. And then there is the lookups folder, and we haven't talked about lookups yet, but imagine it containing some files like CSV files. So just rows and columns of data we want to use later on. And we will talk a lot about lookups in later lessons. I just wanted to introduce you to the concept, to the name here of lookups. If you stumble upon it, having a look at apps, then you know what's going on here. And then there's the metadata folder, and this is used to configure permissions. So if we go back to our example with the storage dashboard app, we may want to limit this app to be only visible for storage administrators. If you think about a SPLUNK search chat or a SPLUNK single instance being used by multiple teams, by multiple people, then this can become very crowded. And if we install a lot of apps in there, then the app menus and everything get really crowded and busy. And this way we can keep the interface nice and tidy for all our different users. And if I open the SPLUNK UI and I'm a Windows administrator, then I only see the apps that are useful for Windows administrators. And then there's the static folder, and this is where icons and images are stored. If we open up apps, then we may see icons and background images and things like that in SPLUNK Web, and these are all stored in the static folder. So let's see how we can install an app in SPLUNK Enterprise. The first way we're going to discuss is SPLUNK Web. So in SPLUNK Web we can select an app package, which is nothing more than a compressed folder structure like a zip file or a tar.gz file, and then we can upload it and let SPLUNK Web do the installation for us. And since SPLUNK Web is only a front end for SPLUNKD, the service behind the scenes, we can skip SPLUNK Web also, and we can talk to the REST API directly. So no matter if you prefer curl or write your custom Python script, or you use Postman or something the like, you can use these tools to interact with the REST API and install an app this way. And the other way is SPLUNK CLI. You may remember SPLUNK CLI when we restart SPLUNK or when we execute certain commands on the shell. So since SPLUNK CLI is only just a front end for REST API again, we can also use SPLUNK CLI to install apps. And the last way we are mentioning here is just by creating files, creating folders, editing files. So you go in at the apps and you create the folder, and if you put some files in the correct locations, this is enough for SPLUNK to realize, this is an app I need to parse, I need to look into it and what the configuration tells me. When it comes to the SPLUNK Universal Forwarder, we have not that many options, because when it comes to the forwarder, we don't have SPLUNK Web. The UF is a very stripped down version of SPLUNK, and it contains no front end, no web interface, so SPLUNK Web is not an option here. And the Universal Forwarder comes with a REST API, but it is a general hardening recommendation to disable the REST API on Universal Forwarders. So in the real life, you may or may not be able to talk to the REST API on UFs. So in this case, we just skip it, because normally it's not possible in real world scenarios. And SPLUNK UF comes with the SPLUNK CLI as well. But if we disable the REST API, a few of the commands are not possible anymore. They don't work anymore because they rely on the REST API in the back. And this is why SPLUNK CLI also is not an option. So we are left with the option of copying folders over, creating folders, editing files, and in a kind of a manual fashion. And in the real world, there's something called deployment server. So of course, a Splunk administrator being responsible for hundreds or thousands of UFs is probably not going to create folders by hand and editing text files. So deployment server is kind of the config management component in the Splunk ecosystem. But for this course, we stick to the text editing and folder creation and copying files, because in the end, also if you use a deployment server, you are not doing anything else. You're editing the files there as well. Only the distribution part is what is becoming more easy when deployment server is used. And this way we really get into the nitty-gritty of text files and configuration files, and we see how Splunk works behind the scene best. So after learning about how we can install apps on our Splunk enterprise instances and our universal forwarders, let's go ahead and download one from Splunkbase and install it using Splunk Web. So imagine I want to onboard some Windows event logs. I can go in here and search for Windows. And since I already recognize the logo, I'm going to select this one here. And this is kind of the official Splunk add-on for Microsoft Windows. So if you have a look here, this is built by Splunk itself. So this is a very common app since a lot of enterprises are using Windows, and we are going to use this add-on in this course as well. So I'm going and select the download button. And I've already read the terms and conditions in the past, of course, and then I'm going to agree to download. And the apps are pretty small, you know, only folders and text files most of the times, so the download finished instantly. Switching to my Splunk here, I'm going to log in to Splunk Web, and in the apps menu on the left I'm going to click on this little cogwheel here, and now I can select browse more apps, which will open Splunkbase again, but I already downloaded the app, so I'm going to select install app from file. I'm going to browse for the file and the Splunk add-on for Microsoft Windows. This one is the right one. As you see, apps have an extension like a tar.gc file. It can also have a .spl extension or a .zip extension. And we don't want to upgrade the app. This is an app we are newly installing, so we don't bother with this checkbox down here. I select upload. Going to take a while. And as it says here, the Splunk add-on for Microsoft Windows was installed successfully. So this was already it. And now we can go ahead and use all the features the Splunk app brings with it in our Splunk enterprise instance. So after installing the Windows add-on, let's have a look what is really there on the file system. So I logged in on my Splunk instance using SSH, and as always I'm changing the user context to the user Splunk here before doing anything. Oops, seems like I mistyped the password. All right. Then we go in opt Splunk, and etc apps is the location where apps are installed. And if we have a look around in here, then we see that the Splunk TA for Windows was installed here. And if we go in here, whoops, and let's go in the default folder. And as you see, configuration files from the kind we already know. So if we have a look at inputs conf here, then you see a lot of, let's try that again using less, a lot of different stances here ready to be used if we want to onboard the application log, if we want to onboard the security log, DHCP server, Windows updates, different scripted inputs that allow us to ingest the output of scripts that are running on our instance, and everything like this, ready to go. So as you see on the CLI, on the shell, it's the same thing if you just move the folder over there, if you extract it on the shell, or if you install it using Splunk Web. In the end, it all leads to the same result, folders and files being stored in Etsy apps. And that wraps up this lesson. You learned how Splunk apps work, how they are structured on the file system, and how to install them either using Splunk Web or on the CLI. These skills will be very useful moving forward as we leverage scenarios that make use of these apps.